Hello, everybody. My name is Mirko Novakovic. I am co-founder and CEO of Dash Zero, and welcome to Code Red. Code, because we are talking about code, and red stands for requests, errors, and duration, the core metrics of observability. On this podcast, you will hear from leaders around our industry about what they are building, what's next in observability, and what you can do today to avoid your next outage. Today, my guest is Bill Lobig. Bill is Vice President at IBM and responsible for the automation portfolio, which includes a company that I initially founded, Instana, but also companies like Turbonomic. And I'm super happy to have you here, Bill. Welcome to Code Red.
Hey, Marco, thanks for having me. It's been a long time. It's exciting to get together again.
Yeah, it's 4 years. I thought about it. It feels like a year to me, but it's already 4 years. But I
Time
always
flies.
start the conversation with my first question about a code red moment. So did you have a code red moment in your career?
Yeah, probably more than a few. I was thinking about this and making it very relevant to the audience and the topic here today. And the one that comes to mind, as I think, is one that everyone can associate with. Is a few years ago, we had this Log4j vulnerability. Everybody remembers that, right? And I reflected on that recently, and you know, the answer everyone was looking for was fix everything, everywhere, and every version, tomorrow, today. And I think, largely speaking, it took many companies months to get through that, right? Months, and it just so happened to occur on the Christmas holiday. And you know, this is a great example of where, as we've evolved, that I think AI and observability and the kind of new ways of thinking about this stuff can really help drive better insight into, in that example, prioritization of, do we fix the right vulnerabilities in the right sequence for the right reason? Are they attack surface area? Are they back office? All of these things. And I think it was largely chaos, and it doesn't need to be that way. So that was what I thought about.
Yeah, that's a good story. And I remember that very well, especially because I was a Java developer and I use Log4j everywhere, right? So that was a pretty tough one. But talking about this, I had a different question, but that's a very interesting topic because I know that, and I read that IBM is doing a lot with Watson and AI and Watson X, I think it's now, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you also announced a lot of new features for Instana, which I always follow, and some of them are automation features. I mean, I know there is this auto discovery. So we basically, with Instana, we built an agent that auto discovers all the technology, including libraries, right? We could figure out which libraries are running inside of your code. So we easily could say, this is the code where log4j is running out of the box. Do you have some automation on top? How is it working today? How are you using AI to automate exactly what you were just explaining? So how could you use Instana and IBM automation products today to solve those issues?
One of the things that we've been very focused on is, so you mentioned the auto discovery, but helping people find that needle in the haystack or improve that signal to noise ratio more easily than they ever have. And it's funny, a couple years ago, when IBM acquired Instana, AI ops was like this hot topic, right? And I've always thought that term was a little, it's like, what does it even mean, right? I think of AI as like, I like to use analogies. It's like electricity. It's like in the walls. It's all around you. You don't think about it. You take it for granted. Alone, it doesn't really do much, but it makes your house work, makes your TV work, your microwave, like it powers things. So in that way, it's a feature of other things, and that's how we're leveraging it, which is a feature of observability. So issue summarization, probable root cause detection. We're experimenting and playing around with, and this would be a great thing for your audience to give us feedback on, automated remediation in terms of generating scripts, runbooks, playbooks. And I personally think, I'm observing people aren't quite ready for that yet. Like, they want the
Mm.
suggestion, not the full, like there's still a human in the loop there. But it's really about leveraging AI to do what it's always done, which is process massive amounts of data better than humans can and give you a recommendation on what you should do.
When we started with Instana, we had this root cause analysis, right? Which worked pretty good, but you have false positives. And my experience was, if you are right 99 out of 100 times, people will not appreciate if you do this one mistake, right?
Yes.
Especially if you wake up in the middle of the night and then you figure out it's a false positive, which probably always happens. And so one of the things I read about, and I like the idea, Dion Almar written that, who is now on an AI company, was at Google. He compares it to Google search. And he says most of the root cause analysis tools or tools want to show you the one root cause, right?
Yes.
Where if you search in Google, you get a list of possible results. And if the first one is not correct, you still have this second or third, which means if the third is correct, you don't care that the first one was not correct, right? And
Yes.
I kind of like the idea to have this kind of system where you don't say, hey, here is the root cause, but here's a list of prioritized possible root causes. And then if the first one is not correct, you still have the second or third choice. And I like the idea, which is then hard to do automation because you don't know upfront, but you can still have a user in between, which is what you were saying. It's exactly my experience that users are probably not ready yet for full automation. But that way they could say, yeah, the third one is correct. And now I want to automate.
I completely agree. And I like this analogy with search. And this also brings that level of explainability or transparency. So unlike Google, where you search engine optimization, you're paying to get to the top. And here we can say, here are the probable root causes and why, and help people understand, the reason for that. And then they can choose for themselves which one they think is the actual root cause. And to your point on like the automations, known problems to known solutions seem like an obvious thing, but just because there's a known solution to a known problem doesn't mean you in the moment know that solution, right? So there's a lot that can be done with AI around curating that and giving those actions to the probable root causes that you may pick in the list, for example. Just another example of AI's applicability.
Yeah, but coming back to my first question I wanted to ask, because I'm really curious. I mean, I'm the co-founder of Instana, and I built that product for 5 years, and now it's your baby, right? So it would be very interesting. What happened in the past 4 years? What are the exciting new things? How is Instana evolving? That would be really interesting for me to understand.
Yeah, it's been a fun ride. So what we acquired in Stana, as I think you'd agree, it was the best, and I think continues to be the best at cloud native, right? It was built for Kubernetes on Kubernetes, and that's really been at the core of it. But the observability market has evolved, and the expectations have gone up around other capabilities that cost management, synthetics, real user monitoring, digital experience, all of these things, and truth be told, Instana lacked a lot of those back then. So we filled in all of these gaps. We've got synthetic monitoring now, remote points of presence for latency testing. We've got full logging capabilities, not just in the context of observability, but even vulnerability and some security capabilities. You wouldn't be a serious observability vendor if you didn't say you had OpenTelemetry, which we've
Yeah.
integrated as a first class citizen. And frankly, I'm really excited about that because, it avoids vendor lock-in. That's what a lot of folks are interested in. But it really, to your point earlier on AI, pushes the expectation up. Where it's like agents are now commoditized. Okay, I'm fine with that. But what are you doing with this data? And how are you leveraging it in a first-class way? And we have OTel Weave throughout our analytics and our topology and other things. And also, you touched on Turbonomic in a few of these, and I can elaborate on those later. But there's some other interesting acquisitions we've done too, and we're really driving these things together and bringing cost data in, for example, with kube cost. So we've rounded out Instana and built around that core of best in cloud native and brought all of the what are now, fundamentally expected capabilities around an observability solution.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I know there were, it's not easy, right? As a startup, you have to pick your bets and then you start, and observability is so big. And you just mentioned security, which is also interesting. I would like to have your opinion here, how those categories are merging together, right? If you look at Datadog, Dynatrace, the other competitors, Datadog for a long time was modern monitoring, and now it says modern monitoring and security. And you see that more and more, that it seems like those categories in parts are converging, right, into a platform. And as far as I understood, you are also going that path, right? Having
Yeah.
some sort of checks on logs and other things.
Yes. So it's interesting, Datadog did rebrand and they went hard at SIM, at a security event and incident management. It's funny. People talk about platforms, but I don't believe anyone buys a platform. Platforms emerge through the synergy of adjacent use cases, and it makes it easier to get to use case B from A than it did to originally get A. So if you have these things, and if you get into this SIM and security, the user persona of that is pretty different, in my opinion, than someone who, for example, is looking at cost considerations in an SRE context. But they're all linked in that spectrum of DevSecOps. What we focused on heavily is less on the SIM use case, more on vulnerability management and shifting left. I hate this term, but it's used. It's a kind of a cliche term, helping developers be more proactive in what they do. So if you think about, in my opinion, and you're the expert because you founded this company, I inherited it. Largely, the APM market, in my opinion, was built around an assumption that something will go wrong and a human needs to root cause trace it and fix it. Okay, well, how do we get some of those considerations into the pipelines and the CI/CD processes so that we can have better A/B testing, release rollback, and things of that nature to catch these issues much earlier, or even allow real-time debugging and troubleshooting of issues by developers in a production context, which is probably a whole nother hour discussion there on the security considerations and such there. So we're looking at vulnerabilities, security, code quality, things of that nature on the pushing towards the developer side of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Though my experience is that having performance in CI/CD requires a really high maturity of the customer, because it essentially means that you need the tests, some sort of automated tests during that period, because if you otherwise it's more a static code analysis. But if you really want to do, I tried this a lot of times, having this continuous performance improvement, but most customers are lagging uh, behind those tests, right? They don't have them, and it's really hard also to keep them up and running. That's something I could see AI work, right?
Yeah.
Because you do a code change, and AI could help you keep those tests up and running, right? Because I was a developer myself. That's the first thing. If you have high pressure and you need to get that fix out, you do your unit tests, but the
Then you're done.
automated test suite, you say, "Ah, I can fix that later," right? and
Yes.
then uh, and then once that starts, you will never get them up and running again, right? That's kind of a big issue I see in the market.
I agree with you. I think the good news is people are motivated in that direction because what you're describing is test escapes, right? Then, the pain comes back later in a different form. And this is where there's so many of these things converging. Yeah, code generation. We talked about Watson X and tools like developer assistance and like how do we help them write those tests? Because the fun part is writing functionality, not tests, and so all of this I think is part of driving automation through and improving application resilience throughout beyond observability tools.
Yeah. How do you see that's something I'm just curious about? It's a cost perspective. You as Instana, you run on premise and in the cloud. So on premise, it's kind of you can move the problem of infrastructure costs somehow to the customer, right?
Mhm.
But in the cloud, you can't. And one of the things I see as an issue, if you talk about AI and LLMs, is if you use that on the amount of data that's produced in observability, it can create a lot of cost, because it's just, I mean, you have probably billions of logs to process. And if you were to apply an LLM on each of those logs, or you have to do it really smart and really intentional. Otherwise, there's a high chance that you have an explosion of costs, and the value compared to that, I don't know if it always matches. I don't know if you have seen that problem, and how you address that.
I don't think it's hit mainstream yet to the point that it's affecting the majority. I think this idea of LLMs and GPU and compute and cost associated with it in general. I mean, I'm looking at NVIDIA's valuation. What is it, over 3 trillion now? I don't know anyone. I haven't met anyone who can clearly articulate the ROI they were there. The promise is there, which is why all this investment is being made. But how are we really tracking those costs? And this is maybe a great opportunity to talk about. You mentioned earlier bringing these things together in platform. We acquired Apptio about 18 months ago, and I've been working for the leadership of Apptio, which is actually interesting. IBM typically buy company, they integrate them. I went into Apptio, and it's all about, at the end of the day, getting to unit economics, which is every piece of cost, human, infrastructure, license, software, hardware. How does it all roll up into a business initiative? And then you can have accountability or responsibility all the way back through that, which is why we're bringing, cost data into Instana, for example. So it's kind of like AI in powered by AI, and then observability of AI. And, you had also asked, I'm kind of jumping back here, what have we been up to in these last 4 years? GPU and LLM observability too. We've got some cool articles on, in the Langtrace community and some things of that nature as well to help people measure and understand these. But I agree with you. We can't just throw the hammer of AI at everything because there is big considerations to be
Yeah.
had.
Talking about Aptio, I saw that acquisition. I know Aptio, but can you explain shortly to the audience what Aptio does and why it's important?
So Aptio is a IT financial management and FinOps company. And what is the difference in those two things? So there's kind of two dimensions. One is around traditional, I'll call them CapEx and total cost. So if you think about Aptio ITFM, it's like a wide angle lens. It includes all of your costs from capitalization, depreciation, your most precious resource, your people, human labor costs, software costs, all of these things. So Aptio is the market leader in that. They've coined and drive the TBM strategy. It's called Technology Business Management. If you Google that, you'll see there's an open source council around it. And then we also have the zoom lens, if you will, which is within that is FinOps. And that is a discrete, specific focus on cloud costs. And why is that different? It's because in the cloud, and it's probably obvious to everyone, like the spend power, the delegation is very decentralized. Any developer on any day who has access to the cloud account can spin things up and down and drive massive cost considerations. And so that needs a new way of working. And FinOps is a bit of a play on words, but it's kind of like DevOps. It was meant to bring developer and operations closer together. We still have development, we still have operations, but like they speak a common language, and we've kind of improved that. And getting finance and operations people to kind of be on the same page and driving that accountable spend is a really important part of this. And where it ties to observability is we are seeing those SREs, those DevOps, the people who live in these IT operations, these observability tools, now want to see cost considerations natively in those tools because they're being increasingly asked to be mindful of that and to monitor and measure it on behalf of the financial obligations of the business.
So essentially, Instana can feed data into Aptio to provide information about cost and infrastructure and metrics and usage and applications and these things?
Yes, that is a great synergy. I'm glad you brought it up. So Instana knows what all the application dependencies and relationships are, and it can feed that to Aptio. And in this world of cost management, generally speaking, there's two ways to look at it. There's assumptive based allocation and consumptive. Assumptive means like assumption. You're making an assumption, right? So consumption is where you want to be because it's based on real usage.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a great example. Kubernetes is highly virtualized infrastructure technology. If you have 10 applications all running against the same cluster and pods are getting evicted and spun up and nodes are coming and going, how do you allocate those things accurately? Most companies just, I'll take the number of applications, divide by that, and everybody gets an equal portion. Instana can tell you exactly how much workload and demand is coming from everything and then drive that more consumptive. In the inverse, Aptio can now feed cost data into the DevOps and SRE views of Instana. So it's just one more consideration there, like performance. Because you zoom out, the reason there's waste in cloud is because people take an overly conservative posture to ensure application performance, right? It's easier to get dinged for your budget being a little out of whack than it is, the thing goes down during the critical period, and then you have system outage and unhappy customer. So how do you balance performance and cost? Like that's what it's all about. And this is why I think observability and APM tools are so ripe for that integration.
Yeah, and I had Ben Nye on this podcast, the CEO of Turbonomic, and one of his claims, I remember also at IBM when he told that internally, because the obvious thing is to say Turbonomic drives with cost, right? But Ben is always saying, no, that's not the driver. It's performance, right? as
Yes.
you said, people care more about their apps running smooth and with high performance than spending for it, right? And he made the example, if spend would be the number one driver, you can just shut down the application, right? Then you have zero cost. And
Yes. Yeah.
and I
I
like
love
that
that.
analogy. But at the end of the day, Turbonomic manages the resources and can then it could use Instana and Apptio information to then manage and balance those infrastructure, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And to your the comment you made, I find amusing because I use that too. And I know Ben, if IT's primary job was to save costs, they would turn everything off and go home, right? Like it's ridiculous to think about. But their job is performance, and how do you do it in a cost-effective way? And you're absolutely right. Turbonomic is an application resource and performance management tool. It happens to size things down or up. And that has also been integrated. By the way, and Turbonomic in the fourth quarter is now a native integration with Instana. So we've brought that capacity-based remediation technology there. So there's two ways in which that works. One is in an incident context. If I need to scale the thing up or down, I can now do that in a very integrated and elegant way with the AI of Turbonomic, ensuring that you're going to have performance guarantee. But also, if you think of not just Turbonomic, but any infrastructure as code, any automated system that's changing things, an APM or observability tool might see the CPUs just went in half and the CPU doubled, and they're like, oh, an alert went off. Well, maybe that was intentional because I didn't need all those CPUs and I was wasting money. So now
Yep.
the APM tool observability can be smarter about these infrastructure changes and why they're occurring to minimize false positives.
Talking about Turbonomic, I mean, as far as I remember, it was initially basically built for managing VMware instances, right? And
Yes.
and I remember at the acquisition time, it was very early around Kubernetes, but I can see that it probably evolved into that cloud native world. So it can manage Kubernetes now too and understands the workloads and how is it integrated there?
Yeah, Turbonomic, it's funny, I learned the product was originally named VM Turbo. That was like a little history tidbit there. But it's evolved greatly, much like Instana. So not only does Turbonomic now manage and optimize Kubernetes and does it in a way that is more powerful than horizontal pod scaling or vertical even. In fact, the Red Hat team is using it, right? And like they're the OpenShift team. We've also invested heavily in optimizing what I'll call PaaS, hyperscaler or cloud service provider PaaS, and beyond IaaS. So, compute memory storage, EKS, S3. We do all of that. Now we see our clients demanding, and we've implemented, Aurora DB, Redshift, Databricks, right, getting into optimization of those SaaS native services that run on there. So GPUs even. These things are very expensive, and are they being fully utilized? Are your inference times latent or not? All of these are areas where we've accelerated Turbonomic in the last few years.
And talking about VMs and servers and PaaS and on-premise, right? I think you are now almost the last vendor left who is supporting on-premise, to be honest. I know that the newest Dynatrace version going cloud only, and I know a few of the developers still around. I'm still in contact with them, and I know you heavily invested in making on-premise super easy with Instana. And so, how is your strategy there? I mean, you have probably a lot of governmental customers and others who have high security demand, and they will want on-premise. So, how is your thought there, and how do you make sure that this works smoothly with the SaaS infrastructure? I know how hard it is. That's why I'm asking the question, right? I
Yeah,
always struggled with the on-premise and SaaS, keeping it in parallel, right?
we still see a lot of interest and demand for, we refer to it as self-hosted now, right? So you can run it, it's a container, you can run it where you want. And to the point on optimization or consumability improvements we've made, a lot of clients, they bring a container, okay, I can run it locally, but if this is a monitoring tool at the end of the day, it can't go down. So it needs to be highly available, which means I need Kubernetes. And not all customers, as popular as Kubernetes is and as strategic as I see it, it's still early-ish days, in my opinion. I talked to some customer recently. I don't know who, I can't say their name anyway. They say we have 1,000 applications, like 100 of them are on Kubernetes, right? There's a lot to be done. We continue to release feature parity, SaaS and on-prem at the same time. I know you mentioned Dynatrace; they're hanging in. All the new stuff, Grail is going to SaaS. We're still doing it equally in both. It is hard. We have clients who want it. We've invested in making that ability to run that thing in a self-contained way very easy using, Linux install, embedded VMs. So you don't need to stand up your own Kubernetes infrastructure if you're not, that mature yet in your journey along Kubernetes.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. And how do you see AI in that context? That makes it even more complicated, right? If you are using AI, you have to provide that infrastructure also in an
Yeah.
on-premise environment.
So that we've not solved yet, admittedly.
Okay.
So for our AI use cases, we're inferencing from the cloud. Obviously, that's a customer consideration or conversation. Do you want to send your thing there to train? Is it a RAG pattern? Do you even need to send any data? Because some of these things, like the known problem, known solution, we can get information and answer these questions or give these recommendations without even using the customer's data because we've trained it on other sources. But that's not a solved problem at this point.
Yeah, it's same with Apple, right? They also want everything on the phone, but for a lot of use cases, they have to send the
Yes.
data to the Apple cloud, which they say is more secure. But it's it it's something I can also see that it's a hard problem to solve, right?
And I think it's interesting for Apple too, because now they're brought ChatGPT into Apple Intelligence. So now they're even outsourcing some of the stuff over versus their privacy and security has always been their primary thing. So it's interesting to see how that's evolving.
And how do you see AI and agents develop in the context of observability? At the moment, my observation is that there is a lot of noise, but not so much real AI implementation with super high value yet, right? You saw at the beginning, you saw something like chatbots, right, which could explain something. You saw natural language as a query language, but I haven't seen too many really groundbreaking use cases yet. How do you see that? What did you implement at IBM and with Instana, and what do you see in the next? I think nobody can see further than a year at the moment, right? It's hard to see how that develops. But what do you see in the next year or two?
I agree with you. This stuff is very high on that hype cycle, that hype curve. What do you call it? Peak of inflated expectations? But I do think, as we get into that sort of plateau of productivity at some point, there's real value in there. So the areas we think that will emerge and that we're investing on, and by the way, one of the amazing things about IBM is our research team, like billions of dollars. These guys just experimenting stuff, and we're looking at, how can we use found LLMs for forecasting, anomaly detection, better multimodal telemetry analytics across log event, melt, metrics, log event traces. Um, Agentic frameworks is kind of a hot new thing that, we're incubating it. It's not there yet, but how do I have like a workflow of LLMs where they're all specialized, right? Like we talk about, if you go into the AI world, you large language models, small models. You mentioned the cost around these things, and IBM is very focused on these smaller, more targeted, fit for purpose models. And in the context of observability, what if I can have an agent, if you will, that can do probable root cause, and then it hands it off to the next one that says, well, for this problem, here are the potential actions or remediations. Okay, then hand it off to the now this model to go do those actions or remediations. Another area, you mentioned it's high degree of maturity, but maybe it's the nirvana state or the holy grail, but getting to code repair is ultimately where it will become autonomic. Will it happen in our lifetime? I think so, but like anything, the people and culture piece is more important and harder than the technology piece, and I think that's what we're working through as an industry.
I remember 4 years ago when I still worked at IBM. I worked with Rama. She was
Mhm.
on the lab for AI, and was amazing what they were already doing at the time. If you look today in the lab environment, right? And I was always like eager to productize that because they had really cool things. I remember log pattern detection and stuff like that. Did you manage to transfer some of that AI lab stuff into the product? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard, right? Because as far as I remember, IBM Lab is not built really to build products. It's really a scientific lab, right? Where they can
Yes.
experiment and they get not, I don't know if it's still, but as far as I understood, they get not incentivized to build products, but really groundbreaking technology, right? And so did you
Yes.
manage to get some of those things from Rama into the product?
Yeah, that's right, and that's by design, right? Like, if it's an engineering problem, which I define as just people and time, like we know how to do it, we just need to do it. That's not the responsibility of research and folks like Rama. They do prototype, they do experimentation, they prove ideas. We take those and turn those into commercial off-the-shelf software that's enterprise grade and scale. I would say 8 out of those 10 things don't make it, which is kind of the beauty of research because not all of them are, that's just why it's research. The logging anomaly stuff you particularly mentioned on, yes, that did make it, and actually that's part of the basis of how we've closed the gap where we didn't even have logging really 4 years ago, not in
Yes.
any serious way. Now we do, and we haven't gone as far into, like, full log analytics or clickstream analytics like a Splunk might have, but for observability, AI ops, infrastructure, and even now the vulnerability use cases, that has evolved into a really powerful set of foundational capabilities.
Yeah, I loved it. I saw the initial ideas and also saw it working in those environments, and it was amazing, right? And I love to see that it made it into the product. You mentioned, and I have to say, I totally agree with you. I always hated the word AI ops, right? Because I never understood what it is. Because if you looked at the vendors who were AI about, that were companies like Moogsoft and Big Panda, which was basically event management, right?
Yes.
And so I was always struggling to understand, oh, the next big thing is AI ops and how did that word evolve? Because it was called What's an AI ops 4 years ago. Is it still there? How did the product evolve and how do you see that develop in the future?
The product is still named that. It's very hard to change those names. So, it's because it takes another year for what happened to that thing. Oh, the name changed, right? So that's always hard. It was coined after the industry usage of the term. And one of the things we learned since then, you're right, very event and incident management driven. You mentioned Moogsoft, Big Pandas out there. These have like manager of manager approaches, I will call them. I think if you don't own the data, you're at a disadvantage, right? Coming in and saying, now, OpenTelemetry and these techniques will commoditize that out, but coming over the top and say, I got AI that's better than whatever the thing that collected your data has got it, I think is going to be hard. I feel strongly that AI is a feature of everything, as I mentioned earlier. So in our strategy, you will not see AI ops SaaS. Doesn't exist. We implemented that for self-hosted. There's a lot of use cases there. We have big business customers are enjoying that. It continues to innovate. But for SaaS, we decided to put all of this into Instana and just make Instana the AI-powered observability solution, for the future of those workloads.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's
Yeah.
uh that's
I
interesting.
don't think it's
Yeah.
too it's like saying AI data. It's like AI ops. AI applied to ops, AI applied to data. What does AI applied to data mean? Like everything. So, I'm not a fan of the term either.
And I have a question of OpenTelemetry. Just, I mean, I'm a big fan of OpenTelemetry. Obviously, we at Zero we only do OpenTelemetry, but I have to say that in a lot of times I'm really missing the agent of Instana because it was so powerful. And OpenTelemetry is hard to implement, right? It's really hard to implement. It's not easy. It's not out of the box. It does not do a good job in auto discovery. So I'm not sure if you're allowed to tell the real numbers, but maybe in general, uh, what would you say your customers? How do they leverage OpenTelemetry compared to the Instana auto discovery agent? Is that like OpenTelemetry is an addition to the agent? Do they replace the agent with OpenTelemetry, or how do you see the adoption in your customer base, which are, I would say, largely also really big enterprises, right? Are they really adopting it, or are they still using heavily these auto discovery, easy to use agents?
We're seeing it in addition to, and since we added OpenTelemetry support a year ago, we've seen a massive, massive uptick in its usage, like 6x And we could do the math on that. And you're right. It's if I was going to use the word crude, that's an unfair term, but there's more assembly required, to your point, right? On implementing that. I embrace it heavily and welcome it. Because look, if you look at the industry and the market, there's some 800-pound gorillas out there, right? And they've largely locked in and expanded those use cases because of the stickiness of agents on these systems. And it's a switching cost. So if OpenTelemetry can supplant those and make it easier, and then the value goes to what you're doing with that information through your topology, your probable root cause, applying AI, the correlation, that's a great advantage for us because
Yeah.
we'd love to get some more of those 800-pound gorillas in our remit. We also see a high demand for an OpenTelemetry based SDK, if you will, which is something we've introduced, and using that to get back to some, and maybe this is part of that self-hosted use case we have, like some of that older workload, like the infrastructure monitoring, so Datadog infrastructure but there's infrastructure that is kind of not CSP PaaS infrastructure. It's more traditional middleware kind of stuff. And how can OpenTelemetry be implemented there? And if the community's not doing it, how do you provide a connector so customers can do it themselves? So it's really an augmentation from what we see.
Is there an OpenTelemetry SDK for COBOL?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I don't know either, but that would be interesting, right? Because I know the mainframe integration, and if you have like Kix or IMS.
Yeah, a lot of that's coming through a Megamon and these types of
Yeah.
tools today. Yes.
Yeah. But not yet OpenTelemetry. But it could be. It would be cool,
Could be.
right? To have a COBOL.
There's no reason why not.
Yeah. I mean, the protocol is standardized. Yeah, it should work. So, Bill, it was really fun hearing about Instana. Great job. It makes total sense to widen the platform, synthetics, RAM, logging, AI was added, and the integration strategy, right? With Turbonomic, with Aptio, making it, you didn't like the word platform, but essentially it is a platform then, right?
That's where we're working towards, but it emerges from the synergies. And we've got a lot of really great best-in-class technology, acquired and organic, coming out of research, back to your Rama examples. And we're excited about unlocking new use cases and value for our customers.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Mirko. Take care.
Thanks for listening. I'm always sharing new insights and insider knowledge about observability on LinkedIn. You can follow me there for more. The podcast is produced by Dash Zero. We make observability easy for every developer.